Have you ever been at dinner with somebody? Maybe you've had them over to your house. They invited you over, and they sit there for hours and regale you with stories of their life. Not the boring stories about their grandkids, who are not nearly as impressive as your grandkids are. I understand that. But the kind of stories that make you think, man, I wish I had done that. Man, I wish I'd had that opportunity. I wish I had the resources to go all the places they went and try all the things they tried. I wish I'd done that. When we come to the book of Ecclesiastes this morning, what we get is kind of a dinner table conversation, or maybe a slideshow. I remember sitting around as kids. We'd go, our Christmas vacation, all the family, aunts and uncles all get back together. And just about every year back years ago, somebody would pull out the slide projector. We don't know what those are anymore because now we just pull out our phones or tablets and start swiping pictures. But remember the old slide projector, the 35 millimeter slides, the little plastic squares, and you put them and pictured them up on the wall. And you could go back in your memory and remember things and remember Christmases and birthdays and cookies and all those things. And you see family members that died 20 years ago. And all the kids are like, yeah, who was that? Oh, yeah, that was Aunt Mary. She was the weird one. That was Uncle Joe. He was married to her. He was weirder. All right, and you can go on this little slideshow back through history. Here's what the book of Ecclesiastes, somebody liking this, I thought it made a lot of sense. The book of Ecclesiastes is kind of like a slideshow. It's kind of like this trip down memory lane of a guy who has done everything. He's been there, he's done that long before anybody was making t-shirts about it. And he says, this is what I found out. And in fact, I set out to figure out everything I could about life because I looked around at life, and frankly, life was just confusing. Right? And so I set out to see if I could figure out what life was about. Everything you want to do, I did. Everything you would like to buy, I bought. Every person you'd like to talk to, I talked to him. And so let me tell you the story. This is a man that calls him the preacher here. Maybe the teacher. It's a word for somebody who speaks in public. He's called the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Most likely Solomon. There's some debate about that. But most likely Solomon was the one who wrote this. Now, we're most familiar with Solomon probably from writing the book of Proverbs, right? Some people say Proverbs was what Solomon wrote pretty early, and Ecclesiastes was what Solomon wrote at the end. After he's seen it all and done it all, he writes Ecclesiastes to say, I've seen it all and I've done it all, and here's what I can tell you the conclusion of the whole matter is. And some of you know Ecclesiastes well enough to know I picked that phrase right out of Ecclesiastes. Here's the conclusion of the whole matter. But I don't want to get to the conclusion because I'm just getting started. We'll get there at the end because that's where the conclusion goes, right? Here's the preacher, the king in Jerusalem, who has studied everything in life, and here's what he says, vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Now, you hear that word vanity, and I don't know what you think of. Be honest with me. You think of vain? How many of you just thought of Carly Simon? You're so vain, you probably think this song is about you. How many of you had no idea what I was talking about? Right? We think of pride. We think of somebody who thinks they're better than everybody else. There's this sense in which when we look at life, sometimes we think of it and says, I should be able to understand this, and I can't figure it out. And then we look around and say, everything out there is vain. You look at somebody who's vain and say, you're not good for anything. You're not nearly as good as you think you are. The idea in this word vanity is this idea of a puzzle. The idea of something that doesn't quite make sense, like the person who's so vain. You're like, what did Churchill say about somebody? He's a modest little man who has a great deal to be modest about. You think about it. Here's life. This guy's trying to figure out, and it just looks empty. The old saying is all hat, no cowboy. That's this. All right, you got all these things out there, and it makes no sense. All it's vanity of vanities. Think about this. What advantage does a man have in all his work which he does under the sun? Under the sun is a phrase that occurs almost 30 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's referring to life in this world. This is Solomon's attempt to explain life under the sun in the world that we're living in without appealing to God. He's trying to understand it just in this framework, in this age that we're living in. What advantage is there A generation comes and a generation goes, or goes and then comes, and the earth remains forever. The earth was here when you got here. It's going to be here when you're gone. And that's that. Your birth was unnoticed. I mean, your parents were there, especially your mom. Your dad was probably there too. Maybe a few, your grandma and grandpa came by shortly thereafter. But by and large, nobody cared when you were born. In fact, on the day you were born, you probably shared that hallway in the maternity section of the hospital. You probably shared it with 4 or 5 or 18 other people, and you have no idea who any of them are. And you don't care. You're not searching, I want to know who was born in the room next to me. You don't care. Why? Because a generation comes and a generation goes, and nobody cares when you're born, and nobody's going to care when you die. No, there'll be a few people, but there's like 7 billion people in this world. Most of them are totally unaware that you exist. The sun rises, the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again. You got up this morning. Did anybody see the sunrise? I did. I love being up early. And you know what happens every morning? The sun comes up. Every single, it's never any different. It's always in the same side of the sky. And then it sets on the other side. You know what it does tomorrow? Same thing. You know what's going to do the day after that? Same thing. It's the same thing it's done for thousands of years. It's just all the same. The wind, it blows to the south, it blows to the north. It swirls along sometimes this way, that way, and it returns just like it always has. Sometimes it's strong. Sometimes it's a gentle breeze. It's a hurricane. It's a tornado. It makes the leaves rustle with a comforting sound, or might make the trees fall down. And you know what? There's nothing you can do about it. You can't create wind. I mean, you can turn the fan on, but it's not quite the same thing, right? It just happens. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea never fills up. You ever think about the oddity of that? I mean, usually when you put a lot of water in some eventually, no matter how big it is, it's going to fill up and flow over, right? Except not the sea. Every drop of water that falls on the planet makes its way ultimately towards the sea. Called the continental divide, and goes into creeks and in rivers and makes its way down. Except the stuff that evaporates and goes back up in the sky, and what does it do? It just comes down again. It's just this big cycle, and it never gets full. And these things are wearisome. They're just tiring. You think about that. This is the way it always has been. There's this monotony to life. Verse number 8, wearisome. Man is not able to, we don't even know what to say about it. It's just day after day after day after day after day. And tomorrow's going to be largely like today was. Like yesterday was. Yeah, we have a few different activities. And there's some good days, and then there's some bad days. And later on, there'll come some good days again, and then some bad. It just goes on and on. It's just monotonous. In fact, the eye is not satisfied with seeing. The ear is not filled with hearing. There's no understanding. We can't see it in the sense of understanding what it's about. There's no explanation that's going to change this cycle. Everything that has been, verse number 10, will be. And that which has been done is what will be done. See, the generations, as they come and go, we keep doing the same things. Why? Because that's life. It's just the way. And so we look around at that, and we think, is this all there is? It just becomes this daily kind of, well, I get them to go to work. Why? Because that's what you do. And then you go home and go to bed. Why? Because that's what you do. And then you get up and go to work. Why? Because that's what you do. And then day after day after day after day, and pretty soon you're like turning 50. Like, wait a second. Where did it all go? Because I don't feel like I've done all that much stuff. And is this really all it is at the end of it? Is this all we got for it? Is there any explanation that can make this world make sense to me? Already, verse number 10, is there anything we say, see, this is new? Yeah, I was reading this week. It was about 10 years ago the first iPhone came out. If you got the first iPhone, you're way out of date. Right? You probably can't even sell it for anything. It's just not worth. Why? Because everything keeps moving on, and yet nothing's really new. It's just the same old things repackaged in a different way. It's already existed. The things that the iPhones and all these things were designed to do for us, those things always exist. It just does it in a different way. We can buy and sell, right? But we were always able to do that. It just does it differently. And verse number 11 is the kicker. There is no remembrance of former things, or perhaps former people, those who came before, the former generations. Nobody remembers the later things. Those coming in the future, nobody's going to remember them. Think about this. Your memory will mostly die out with your children. I mean, I remember my parents. Talk to them frequently. I remember my grandparents, but I don't remember a whole lot. I don't even know that I met my great-grandparents, and that hadn't been that long ago. My great-great-grandparents, I have no idea. If you put a picture of two people up on the wall from the 1800s, I would have no idea which one is my great-grandparents. I don't remember them. You know what's going to happen to you? Same thing. You see, nobody remembers those things. And maybe you're sitting there inside, what is it all about? If I'm going to live my life day after day and year after year and get at the end, and nobody's going to remember me, and the ocean's going to be just like it was when I showed up, and the sun's going to keep coming up and going down just like it always has been, what is the point of life? That's what the preacher was wondering. What is life about? Because everything to me just seems like it just goes day after day after day. There's no real change. Everything is just what it is. It's what it always has been. Is this really all there is to it? So he said this in verse number 13, I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that's been done under the heaven. It's a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. It's a hard thing to understand this life, and there's a sense in which it's affliction, just basically trying to make sense. I don't mean it's painful. I just mean it's confusing sometimes when we sit and look at life and try to figure out what it's all about. What is success? What is significance? If nobody's going to remember me in 50 years, what's the point? See, here's the reality. Probably nobody in this room is going to make the history books. There might be somebody here. I'm pretty sure it won't be me. But let's face it, the people who make the history books are people who do something really significant. And we're a bunch of people. We're going to live our lives day after day after day after day after day. And at the end of it, what are we going to have? I don't know. The chances of anybody remembering us for a generation or two are very, very small. If we don't have a lasting legacy beyond our children, what difference does life make? It's vanity. What exactly does that mean? 38 times in the book of Ecclesiastes, the word vanity shows up. All the works that have been done are vanity, verse 14. The life of pleasure, chapter 2, verse 1. I said, I will test you with pleasure, so enjoy yourself. And it was futility, same word. What did it mean? I set out to have the greatest pleasures in life. What did I get for it? It was vanity. Labor and striving, working was vanity. It was like chasing after the wind, which is this image of chasing hard after something and getting nothing. You chase after the wind. What are you chasing after? Just air movement. What do you get if you catch it? Nothing. That's the image it wants to get in our mind. Fools and wise people die just alike. Man and animals die. That's vanity. You work and you gain, and then your profit is taken from you and given to somebody who didn't work, and that's vanity. The person works hard and makes a good living, and at night he can't sleep because it's on his mind all the time. He can't get his mind off of it. That's vanity in 2:23. There are people who think if I just had more money, then I would be satisfied. And they get money and they're not satisfied with it. And chapter 5, verse 9 says that's vanity. Good people die and bad people live, and that's vanity. All these different things are vanity. What is it? What's the common thread of all these things? The common thread of all this is there are things in life that just don't make sense. And no amount of explanation will ever make it make sense. It is confusing. It's like that fog that settles in in the morning. You're driving to work and you have to drive slowly because the fog is so thick. We don't have a lot of those, but we have them from time to time. I remember one time being up north fishing, Fletcher's Pond, and getting out in the morning, and the fog was so heavy on the lake that you couldn't see farther than about 10, 15 feet in front of you. It was kind of eerie because you're trying to listen over the sound of your own motor. You're trying to listen for other boats in the lake, and thankfully being up at 6 o'clock, and it's a lake that you drive slow on, you boat slow on because of the number of logs and sticks in it and stuff like that. But you couldn't see anything. And you get offshore a little ways and you have no idea where the shore is. And you kind of loosely follow the sun shining through the fog a little bit. It's confusing. And so much of life, we live in a fog because we can't really explain it. That's the vanity. When you read Vanity of Vanities, here's what he's saying. This is incredibly confusing. I have no idea how to make sense of this. And we know that there are things in life that don't make sense. I think of the father of one of my best friends. He died a few years ago. He was in his 70s. He lived a good life. He was faithful to God. He served in his church. He was faithful to his family. And he died of brain cancer. I think that's confusing. Why that guy? Are there not plenty of wicked people in the world that could die of brain cancer? Not that you want that on somebody. Saying, well, the good, godly people should live, and the evil, wicked people who don't like God, they should die. That would make sense. But that's not the way it works. But you know what's more confusing than a man in his 70s dying of cancer? Is he outlived his son by 4 years. He outlived his son by 4 years. You see, at funerals, it's children who are supposed to bury the parents, right? Parents aren't supposed to bury children. And maybe some of you have experienced that in your own life. And you've lost somebody, and somebody close to you, and you say, God, this is confusing. I can't make sense of this. Why did they have to die? And yet that is the book of Ecclesiastes, is that sometimes people die at the wrong time. And the good people die and the bad people live. This godly, righteous, faithful man died of brain cancer at 75. He had the exact same ending as wicked people who had never spent a day in church. Is there nothing better? Why does it end that way? Well, Ecclesiastes is kind of the slideshow of Solomon's attempt to figure this out. What is it all about? Chapter 2, verse number 1. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. And futility. Useless. Didn't accomplish anything. I said of laughter, it's madness, and of pleasure, what did it accomplish? I laughed until I was so tired I couldn't laugh anymore. And then I found out laughter doesn't really satisfy that much. I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine while my mind was guiding me wisely. I set out, I was going to try to drink right up to the point where I drank just enough that I didn't go over the edge drunk. So what? What now? I wanted to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of man to do under heaven the few years of their life. I wanted to do just enough foolishness to figure out if foolishness is really bad. Some of you have lived that life. I enlarged my works. I built houses. I planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks. I planted all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves. I had homeborn slaves. I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. I collected silver and gold, treasures of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers. I had bands there all the time. I had the pleasures of men, many concubines, women all over the place. I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. My wisdom stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure. My heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was reward. And I considered all my activities which my hands had done and the labor which I had exerted, and behold, all was vanity. It didn't make any sense. See, when I tell you Solomon lived the life you want to live, he said, I got all the pleasure I wanted. Anything I thought would make me happy, I did it. I wanted to buy something, I bought it. I had all kinds of money. I had gold and silver. I had music, I had women, I had wine, I had all the things that you think will make you happy. And I lived my life that way. And you know what I got at the end of it? Nothing. It was all vanity. It was all confusing. It was too heavy. There was a striving after wind. There was no profit. I turned to consider wisdom, madly and folly. Verse number 12. For what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done? And I saw that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but a fool walks in darkness. Right? Yes. And yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Why is that so? Why does the wise man walk in his wisdom and the fool walk in darkness, and yet they both end up at the same place? Does that make sense to you? He said, it doesn't make any sense to me. I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will befall me. Why have I been extremely wise? If the wise man dies and the foolish man dies, why be wise? Go enjoy life, because we both end up at the same place. There is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool. They both get remembered the same, which is to say, both of them in coming days are going to be forgotten. Verse number 16. How the wise man and the fool alike die. That's confusing to me. I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me. Everything was futility. Then verse 18, I hated the fruit of my labor, which I had labored in the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. You spend your whole life getting, and what do? You leave it all behind. Was it really worth it? You see, here's what Solomon is trying to get us to see. That when we live life in this world, it can be difficult to find meaning. It can be difficult to find purpose because everything is confusing. It looks strangely the same no matter how different you are. The sun comes up and goes down for the wise man and the foolish man just alike. The sun comes up on the rich and the old just alike. The sun sets on the rich and the poor just alike. It doesn't matter because at the end of the day, it's just a day. And tomorrow there's going to be another one. And all around of our lives, we have these piles of things, and we're searching for satisfaction, we're searching for meaning, and we're never quite able to find it. And then we read the book of Ecclesiastes and think, man, if I just had that opportunity. As Solomon tells us all, he's shown us these slides of life, like, man, I know he says he couldn't figure it out, but man, if I had that much money, I bet you I could figure it out. I know you think life here is pretty bad, but if I could travel all the places he traveled to, I'd do better than he did. See, that's our temptation. That's our temptation. Why? Because we're always trying to figure out, what is life actually about? How do I explain all these things? In all over our lives, we see brokenness. We can't deal with everything in Ecclesiastes this morning because it's too big. But I want to give you a sort of flavor for it. In chapter 2, verse 21, there's somebody who works hard their whole life to gain and to have. And that success ends up going to somebody who didn't work for it. It's the same thing in chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. There's a guy in 2, verse 23. He works all day long in his labor, verse 22. His task is painful and grievous, and even at night his mind does not rest. He's devoted everything to getting, and it's like, what's the point? I can't even sleep at night because my mind is devoted to how am I going to do it tomorrow? How do I improve? How do I get better? How do I make more? What's going to happen to it? In chapter 3, verse 16, seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness, and in the place of righteousness there is wickedness. Things are upside down. Might be in the courts where justice can be bribed. It might be in your workplace where you work really hard and somebody else gets the credit for it. There's the people in chapter 5, verse 14. Their riches are lost through a bad investment, and he fathered a son, and there was no one to support him. Put all his money in some kind of investment and then lost it all and had nothing to support his own family. He'd worked hard for it, and through no fault of his own, it's just gone away. That doesn't make sense. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. The acts of oppression. I saw the tears of the oppressed. They had no one to comfort them. And on the side of their oppressors was power. This whole social justice, that powerful people are abusing the weak people. So I congratulated the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still living. Better be dead than alive. Why? Because there's no real hope. Because you can't fix it. In fact, verse number 3, better off than both of them is the one who never has existed. It would be better off to have never been born than to have experienced the meaninglessness and confusion of life. Maybe you felt that way before. You think, man, my life is so bad, I wish I had never been born. When you feel that way, you are feeling the weight of Ecclesiastes. When you experience those thoughts, you are experiencing the weight of what Solomon came to when he's looked all over the world and seen all of these things and said, I can't make sense of it. In chapter 7, a good name is better than a good ointment, and the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. Why in the world would that be so? You wouldn't think of that, right? But why would that be so? It's better to go to a house of mourning than to a house of feasting. Verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter. Why? Because when we are constantly laughing, we are missing the point that we live in a broken world that doesn't make sense sometimes. Hey, if you have never mourned, if you have never been sad about the condition of this world, you haven't thought very hard about it. Because there are things in this world that just don't make sense. There are things in this world that we just can't piece together, and that's why we cry out to God. Why, God? Why? Why me? Why this? Why them? Why not this? Why not that? Why not something else, God? Why? Solomon in Ecclesiastes is constantly asking the why question, and his answer is, I don't have an answer. It just doesn't make sense. In chapter 7, verse 15, I've seen everything during my lifetime of futility, my lifetime of meaninglessness. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his wickedness. So do not be excessively righteous and do not be overly wise. Why should you ruin yourself? If wisdom doesn't pay off, don't stress yourself about it. Don't work too hard, because in the end, it's not really going to matter. Verse number 20, there's a righteous man on earth who continually does good and who never wins. You feel that way? I have tried to follow God. I've tried to live wisely in God's world, and I just can't get ahead. At every step, everything works against me, and I don't get it. And I see the guy over here who's lazy, who does nothing, and he seems to have everything. How does that make sense? What are we to say about this confusion in the world? When you read the book of Ecclesiastes, and I encourage you to read it, and I encourage you to understand that Solomon is writing this book from the perspective of somebody who's trying to explain life without God. He's trying to explain life without appealing to the sovereignty and the rulership of God over all creation. He is trying to explain life from this idea that every good thing should have a good consequence and every bad thing should have a bad consequence, but sometimes the good things have bad consequences and sometimes the bad things have good consequences, and that just doesn't make sense. And he spent his whole life pursuing this. And some of you have done that. You have spent your whole life in hopes of finding meaning, in hopes of finding something that can drive you to the next level, something that can keep you going. And it just doesn't seem to work out for you. And you see somebody else who has it better. You see somebody else who's living the life you want to live, and you say, why them, God? Why not me? Now, why is Solomon doing all this? Because he knows there's something bigger out there. He knows there's something better. God had given him wisdom. And along the life of Solomon, here's what's interesting about the life of Solomon. At the very beginning, when he's king, remember how God gives him wisdom and riches and all those things? And what you see in the life of Solomon is this kind of downhill progression. He has all this wisdom he gives and then doesn't live by it. He says, my son, listen to me. And then you look at Solomon's life and you think, hopefully he followed it up by don't be like me. Because that's exactly what he did. He did all these things in pursuit of meaning. Why? Turn over to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. This is one of those passages of Ecclesiastes that you're probably familiar with. There's a time for everything. There's a time for every event under heaven. Sing along if you want to, right? There's a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to tear down and build up, a time to weep and laugh, mourn and dance and throw stones and gather stones and embrace and shun embracing and search and give up as lost and keep and throw away and tear apart and sew together and be silent and speak and love and hate and war and peace. There's a time for everything. But verse number 11. God has made everything appropriate or beautiful in its time. You see, time is ultimately God's. There is a time for all these things that we spend our life trying to figure out. Is it this time or that time? Or the other time? Or, we're going back. What time is it? And that's because, verse number 11, He has set eternity in their heart. There is a sense in every single human being that there's something bigger than the time. There's eternity. There's a sense of the grandeur of God. There's a sense of the greatness of creation. And we look around this world and say, God, there has to be a bigger meaning. Life has to be explained by something other than my child dying suddenly when he's a youth. There has to be something bigger than my spouse dropping dead of a heart attack at a young age. There has to be something bigger than the disaster of my job or my family. There has to be something bigger out there. God, there has to be some purpose in this. This can't be meaningless. And that is because I believe God has set eternity in our hearts. There is a sense of bigness. There is a moral order that we all know. And that's why we look around and say, this doesn't make sense. Why are we troubled when righteous people die and wicked people live? Because there's a sense of morality. There is a sense of rightness that doesn't match up with the good dying and the wicked living. Why do all of us have that? Because God has placed eternity in our hearts. And yet, man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even until the end. For all of our searching, are you willing to understand this morning? That it will never make sense. There will be things in this life you will never be able to explain. There will be things in this life that you will never be able to understand. And you know what you can do about that? Nothing. You can't do anything about that. The best you can do is accept it and move on. Because it will never change. God has placed that sense of eternity in our hearts. The preacher here, Solomon, was searching for meaning. He's trying to figure out where's the advantage. But God has made it so that we cannot understand. There's a Christian philosopher named Francis Schaeffer. Some of you may be familiar with Schaeffer. He talked about the efforts of mankind throughout history to draw a circle, philosophical circle that was big enough to encompass everything in the world, everything under the sun, to find meaning in life, to draw a circle around everything that was big enough to explain everything. And he couldn't do it. Humanity has never been able to explain everything. That's why you have all kinds of different schools of philosophy. Some people explained it this way and that way and the other way. And then there came this school of philosophy that's known as nihilism. Nothingness, that there's total meaningless in this world. Nothing has any meaning at all. Schaeffer talked about how these philosophers could not draw a circle big enough, and so it led them to fall below what Schaeffer called the line of despair. That there is a sense that people get to in life, in this world, where they just throw up their hands and say, I can't explain it. I have no more gas in the tank to even try. I'm just done. Is there anything that can help? Well, one of the things that Ecclesiastes constantly talks about is that God has given us the opportunity to enjoy life in this world. That there are things in this life, right? There are good things in this life, and we can enjoy them. Listen to Ecclesiastes chapter 2. There's nothing better than for a man to eat and drink and tell himself his labor is good. I've seen it's from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without God, without Him? Ecclesiastes 3. I know that there's nothing better for them than to rejoice and do good. Moreover, that every man who eats and drinks sees good in all his labor. It is the gift of God. There are good things in this world that God has given to us to enjoy. And so when you come over to Ecclesiastes chapter 11, verse number 9, rejoice, young man, during your childhood, and let your heart be pleasant during the days of young manhood, and follow the impulses of your heart and the desires of your eyes. What was Solomon telling his son? Go enjoy life. God has given you so much to enjoy. Enjoy it. Years ago, I remember my youth pastor quoting that verse. He said, Larry, you need to enjoy life more. So those of you who think I don't enjoy life, that's not new. I've been that way for a very long time, right? You need to enjoy life more. He quoted this verse to me. Go enjoy life. Somebody, well, my youth is long since past. It's nothing compared to eternity. So you're still young. Enjoy life. You see, God has given us this life to enjoy, and there is joy in this creation. 2 Timothy chapter 4, 1 Timothy chapter 4 talks about us enjoying the creation that God has given us to richly enjoy. All through the Bible, see, enjoy creation. But look at chapter 3, verse 9 again, because I stopped a little bit before I got to the end, didn't I? Rejoice, O young man, in the days of your childhood. Let your heart be pleasant, follow the impulse of your heart and desires of your eyes, yet know that God will bring you to judgment for all these things. You see, here's the sense that Solomon's getting after. If you're going to explain life in this world, there's only one way to do it. And that is God. And the sovereignty of God. And the wisdom of God. And the fact that sometimes God does things that you and I wouldn't do. And that's okay because you're not God. And I'm not God. And if God does something I wouldn't do, you know what my job is? Nothing. I don't have a job. That's God, right? It's not my job to fix it. God does things. So remove grief and anger from your heart and put away pain from your body, because childhood and the prime of life are fleeting. And how many of us stand at our current stage in life and say, wow, that went fast. We see our children grow up and we wonder where yesterday went to. It's fleeting. And sometimes we get so tied up in trying to explain things that will never be explained that we forget to live life with the enjoyment of God's good creation. And so he says in chapter 12, verse 1, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, where you will say, I have no delight in them. What follows this is a description. And when I read this to you, here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about old age. Okay? That's what I want you to think about. Listen to this and think about old age. Before the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. And in the day the watchmen of the house tremble, and the mighty men stoop. The grinding ones stand idle because they are few, and those who look through the windows grow dim, and the doors on the street are shut as the sound of the grinding mill is low. And one will arise at the sound of the bird, and the daughters of song will sing softly. Think about your body. Think about the dimness. The windows start to close a little bit, don't they? The light is not nearly as bright as it used to be. The windows of our eyes don't see like they used to. The grinders don't quite work like they used to. In fact, maybe you take them out and put them on the bathroom counter at night. Not because of an old hockey injury. The mighty men stoop. The watchmen tremble. You start shaking a little bit. You just can't quite hold the hand still anymore. and you can't quite stand up straight because the body has been bowed by the ravages of time. One arises at the sound of the bird. Doesn't take much to wake you up, does it? Remember your Creator before those days come. See, a lot of people are like, I'll pursue God one day. Right now, I got a family, I got a job, I got a career I got to take care of. I'll get there. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before you get to this place. That's why you're here this morning, right? You're here this morning, I hope, for the goal of remembering your Creator, of being challenged by the Word of God that there's something bigger than the immediate, that we are living for the eternity He's placed in our hearts. And as we look around the world, you know what we say? I say it with you, I can't explain that. I've stood beside the hospital beds of people who say, why? I've stood at the funeral homes in front of caskets with people who say, why? And I say, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I can't explain it. It's meaningless. There's no way to figure out what the meaning is. But rejoice and remember. Rejoice during your childhood. Don't get overly burdened by the things you can't explain. Rejoice in the life that God has given us. But remember your Creator. One day He'll bring you in the judgment for all this. So what's the conclusion of the whole matter? Look down at verse number 9. In addition to being a wise man, the preacher taught the people knowledge. He pondered, he sought out and searched out and arranged many proverbs, probably referring to the book of Proverbs. He sought to find delightful words and the right truth correctly. The words of a wise man are like goads, like little sticks you poke somebody with. Why? To motivate them to do something. The masters of these collections are like well-driven nails. They're given by one shepherd. Beyond this, my son, be warned, the writing of many books is endless. Excessive devotion to books is a wearying to the body. Here's what he's trying to say. There is this opportunity we have to continually try to figure things out. And there will always be new books written on things. And there will always be a new perspective to consider. And that can get wearisome. Because you can spend your whole life trying to find the answer to answerless questions. Try to find the meaning to things that seem totally meaningless in this life, and you will never figure it out. And if you devote yourself to putting all your time and energy into explaining this world, you know what you'll have at the end? A tired life with no answers. So here's the conclusion. When all has been heard, if you had actually read all those books, if you had listened to every piece of wisdom that's ever been said, what now? Fear God and keep His commandments. What's the conclusion? Go ask more questions. Go read more books? No, that's not the conclusion. The conclusion of the whole matter is fear God. He is your Creator. He is the reason you're here. Fear God. Solomon lived his whole life in the fear of missing out. What people call today FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. He lived his whole life with, you only live once. The YOLO. The YOLO and the FOMO is what drives a lot of people. You only live once and you fear missing out. I'm missing out. So he's devoted all his time to not missing anything. He gets to the end and said, I didn't miss anything. And turns out I didn't miss anything. There was nothing there to begin with. Let me save you the trip. You don't have to go every place I've gone. You don't have to spend all the money I've spent. You don't have to have all the experiences I've had. Let my experience be your experience. When it's all said and done, fear God and keep His commandments, because this applies to every person. Well, what about me? No, every person. You're not the exception to that. There's no free passes. You fear God and keep His commandment, because this applies to every person, and God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it's good or evil. You spend your life searching for meaning. You think, I got a free pass. I can do whatever I want because I want to be happy. No, fear God and keep His commandments. Pursue joy. Live life to your pleasures. But God's going to bring you into judgment for that. So walk carefully. Fear God and keep His commandments. Where does that start? For some of you, that starts with Christ. You spent your whole life searching for meaning. You understand, Jesus Christ came into this world as the ultimate expression of God's wisdom. You could live vicariously through Solomon, all of his experiences. The good news of the gospel is that we can live vicariously through Christ. He is the one who deals with the meaninglessness of life. He is the one who ultimately will be able to explain why that happened. He is the one who will ultimately be in control of everything that happens. To fear God means come to Christ, follow Him, keep His commandments. That applies to every person. Some of you start right there today. You need to come to Christ. You're living your life like Solomon. You're hoping success and meaning is just around the next corner. The next promotion, if I can just get that, I can have a few more experiences. If I can just get that, I can buy a few more things. And then I'll be good. No, you won't. All the rivers run into the ocean, yet the ocean's never full. How much is enough? A little bit more. It doesn't matter how much you have. Enough is always a little bit more. Until you come to God. Fear God and keep His commandments. As we close this morning, musicians are going to come. We're going to close with Be Thou My Vision. This is what it means. Get your eyes off the things of this world. Get your eyes off the questions and controversies. Listen, they will be there and they will weigh heavily on our hearts. But at the end of the matter, the conclusion of it all, fear God and keep His commandments. Let Him sort it out. Be Thou my vision, O Lord of my heart. Not be all else to me, save that Thou art. When you sing that, what you're saying is let everything else be nothing to me, only God. Make that the prayer of your heart this morning. Let's pray together. Father, there is a lot of confusion in this life, a lot of things we don't understand. And we will live our whole life without answers. But may we rejoice in the creation You've given us. And may we remember our Creator in the days of our youth. While we still have life, may we fear You and keep Your commandments. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.